all going to have to agree to it. We are going to record this because there are a lot of other people that were not able to make it at this time, but who are curious to sit in on this conversation and just kind of wonder with you all about ways to make Vacant church ministry from a worship standpoint look a little bit easier. It's nice to, I think I've met most of you, if not all of you at some point in time. But my name is Katie. I work for Worship Ministries. I live out on the East Coast of the United States in the greater Washington, D.C. area. Served a church there and went through a vacancy, and I know what that is like. And I know that it's tough. And for some of you who have been at it 3 months and some of you who have been at it 3 years, it's a really particularly difficult place to be. So I sympathize with you in that. I've been there and I know what it's like. I'm wondering if we can just do a quick trip around the room and just tell us who you are and where you serve. Also, how long your church has been vacant. You don't get any prizes for this either. Sorry. I should have come up with like a good door prize, but Irene, you were the first up on my screen, so I'm going to hit you first.
All right. My name's Irene Bucker, and I used to be an elder, and I'm now just a worship leader in our church in Smithers, BC. We've been vacant since August 2020. We've had a very busy search committee who've looked into all kinds of things, but so far we have not found a new pastor.
August 2020, right in the middle of the pandemic.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Ellen, why don't you go next?
I'm Ellen. I'm in Brampton, Ontario. We've been vacant since for 2 years now. And when our pastor moved, so did our worship director. So I am interim worship director, and the idea was that I would get the position, I would stay in that position until we had a pastor, and then they would, with the pastor, hire another worship director. Well, like all of you, it's hard to get a pastor. So I am in a slightly better position right now. We do have a part-time interim pastor who is amazing. So I am not in the position of needing every week to look for a pastor to fill the pulpit. So I am in a much better position than others. But yeah, it's a kind of an interim of a whole lot of different layers.
Heather.
I'm Heather Loonan. I'm a transplant from BC, and now I'm in Southwestern Ontario in Vanastra CRC, which is a tiny little church. We have been vacant since June of last year, so not even a year yet. And we are very blessed that there are many CRC churches nearby. So we typically have only 2 services a month that we need to find pulpit supply for. So that's takes a huge load off because we, really have to supply half. And we have somebody coming. So pray for us and them. We have a pastor coming on the 26th of March, and I'm insanely hopeful for a lot of reasons, but just so that I can stop having to do this, which is horrible. But yeah, so that's a bit about where we're at.
Kyle.
Yeah, my name's Kyle Vanderzee. I serve at a church in Indiana, Northwest Indiana, near DeMott, Indiana. And I have been through a vacancy that was, I think, 7 years ago. I've been at my church a really long time, almost 15 years. So went through that vacancy. It wasn't too bad. The first 3 months, though, were definitely a taste of that finding pulpit supply every single week and getting a new pastor up to speed every single week. Then we got an interim and things were a lot better after that. But our pastor is going to retire in August. So I'm sort of like preemptively here, I guess, to gather some wisdom because my experience is quite limited with this, really, when it comes down to it. So yeah, glad to be here.
Corrine.
I'm Corrine Skolman, and I'm from Ottawa, Ontario, Barrhaven Christian Reformed Church. This will be our pastors. We're not vacant at the moment. Our pastor's retiring in September, but this will be our 3rd time round. And I've been through the other two. So it is, it's a little daunting because I know the last time we were, 2.5, 3 years without a pastor. So looking at this and thinking, oh boy, here we go again. It's not fun. I have the advantage of the fact that I'm not responsible to find pastors to fill in when we don't have a pastor. That is the elder's responsibility. There's an elder dedicated to that. So that's lovely. The harder part is if we don't have a pastor until like a week before the service, right? Then there's an awful lot of work to be done within a day or two when you find out who it is. So those are the things that I'm kind of hoping we can alleviate a little bit.
Yep. Allison.
Hi, I'm Allison. I am serving at a church in Georgetown, Ontario. We've had a little bit of a different situation. We were vacant the end of 2019, not necessarily planned. So we went into COVID with nothing, and we got a STM, which is a specialized transitional minister. He came August 2020. Thankfully, he stayed 2 years, not one. I think they're sort of supposed to stay 1 year, but because of COVID, he couldn't get everything done. So he just left in August of last year. But we've had our search committee going prior to, since early 2021, knowing that he was going to leave. He was temporary. We were vacant probably like in 2014 as well. That was probably the first time our church was really vacant, and there was a big sense of unease and a lot of pressure from the congregation to find someone. This time around, because of the last however many years, there isn't that, which is a nice feeling. We have great worship planners and a lot of people who are willing to help. So that really helps alleviate that feeling on the search committee of the pressure to find someone. But we struggle finding pastors in our area. So we've been really had to be creative with our services. We do video from other churches. Again, we have great worship planners, and I think that's what's helped keep us going, is that our services still feel very consistent, and they flow, and they're themed and stuff. But actually finding a physical even on our classes, we're not classes Huron, even though we're on the border, we're classes Toronto. And we've had even our classes appointments cancel last minute. I just had it right before Lent, and I had to find a video on a Tuesday for a Sunday. And then plan a service around it. So that's our struggle, but thankfully we don't feel pressure or any kind of disappointment from our church congregation yet.
Chloe.
Hi, it's actually Angela. I don't know. My daughter just had a Zoom meeting, so I think her name is still on there, but it's Angela Geisen from First Christian Reformed Church in Thunder Bay, Ontario. And yeah, we've been without a pastor since January 2020. So our pastor left just before COVID, and our pastor search committee, which I'm on as well, was right on top of trying to match us up with a pastor. I'm the congregational life coordinator at our church. So, and basically the only other employee besides the person that does the bulletin and things like that. So yeah, my role as a congregational life coordinator changed already when our pastor left, and then drastically changed when COVID hit. So yeah, we've had a few people come, and we've called a few, but they've discerned that Thunder Bay wasn't for them. We also have somebody coming to visit on the March 26th as well. So yeah, I appreciate prayers to see if that works out. But yeah, it's been a long haul. And finding pastors to preach on our pulpit is definitely a challenge in Thunder Bay. We don't, we have 2 other Christian Reformed churches in Thunder Bay, but, they're only, our classes has them coming, I think, once a month, maybe not even, because then they can't find people. And as well, we have been blessed to have a few interim pastors, and which worked out well. One year during Lent, we had one, and then we had another interim during Advent. So it was really nice to be able to have some consistency through those times in our liturgical calendar. But but anyway, I was really drawn to attend this and then see what other people were dealing with. So thank you.
Lucinda or Pat, would you like to share?
I'll go. I'm unmuted. Hi, I'm Lucinda. Sorry, I have a really old work laptop that isn't allowing me to do video, or else I would definitely show my face. But I'm actually just neighbors to Allison and from Acton, Ontario, from Bethel, CRC. We've been vacant since July 2020. So it's been quite a while, but even though we're only 10 minutes from Georgetown, we're actually in a different classes. So we haven't struggled too much to get to fill our pulpit supply, which has been great. I'm, like Ellen, also an interim worship coordinator. Our worship coordinator left, as well as our youth pastor right after our pastor. So we went down to no staff, and yet we're chugging along. So that's been a really growing experience, I should say, for our church. And then I'm actually, unfortunately, really interim, because I'll be done at the beginning of June. My husband and I are expecting, so I told them I could do it for as long as possible, and then found out we were expecting. I was like, never mind. I now have a cutoff date. So they're hoping to find another gap person for that as well.
Pat, would you like to share anything with us? You don't have to if you don't want to.
You must know me. No. So I kind of stumbled upon this roundtable, actually. So what happened here was, I've been a preaching elder in the RCA for several years, a while back, and then I started a non-denominational church where I live. And in the state of South Dakota, you can be a pastor without being ordained. So I'm not ordained. Hence, what happened was, last Sunday, a church in Chandler, Minnesota, CRC church there, had their Cadet Sunday. And I offered, because of my past and because I knew some of the individuals there, to preach on Cadet Sunday, since I'm a cadet leader there. And the consistory got permission from the powers to be to allow me to do that, since I'm not ordained and I was out of state. And from that, after the worship, then I had several individuals, because they knew my history, instantly asked if I would be willing to do more of that, and even to the point of, would I even be willing to be their pastor? And they've been vacant going on 2 years now. So I said, well, let's hold the horses. Let's, I did one pulpit supply. Let's just, take this by baby steps. And then, of course, the consistory president says, yeah, I also need to make sure what has to be done to do that, if it's even permissible. So then I did some digging for them, looking around, and they came across this round table. I thought, maybe this could be an avenue or resource for some help. Maybe not either. I don't know. So that's why I'm here.
Hey, well, we're glad that you're here today. So this is a space I wanted to offer up to you all to use this time in the best way that you see possible. Recognizing that you already have named a lot of the challenges, and I think the challenges are kind of familiar across the board, right? The inconsistency of working with somebody different every week, not knowing who you're going to be working with, having to work with somebody who you weren't expecting to have to work with, and just kind of that long drag of unpredictability. That's one of it. And another, a lot of you end up with a lot more responsibility on your plates than what you signed up for, or than what's in your job description. That tricky line at the end, other duties as otherwise noted, all of a sudden becomes like 45% of your job description. You're like, wait a minute, how did I get in charge of this? But just naming a couple of those things, which you all have already done, I'm wondering how you best can use this space to network each other, and to ask questions and to say, hey, what are best practices for like planning something thematically, not knowing who's going to come, all of those various things. So again, I want to offer up this space, and that's how I'm going to start today, is just kind of opening the floor. Mostly if you have something that you just have struggled with and you would like to throw it out to a roundtable group of 10 people that are not only sympathetic, but are likely wise as well. I just need a brave soul to go first.
So I have a question. Has anybody tried to plan, let's say for Advent or for Easter, plan in advance the theme that your church would like to be dwelling on and have guest pastors just pick a text accordingly? Something that would fit into that theme? Because that would give some consistency from week to week, right?
Well, I can tell you what we've just recently done for Lent. Just before COVID hit, I had started using, maybe some of you have seen it in the Reformed Worship magazine, the idea of messy people, merciful God, and putting our messes on a panel every week, like a visual. So we had started that just before COVID. We went through 2 Sundays and then COVID hit. So I had this big panel and everything, packed it away and thought, well, maybe we'll use it someday. And this year I pulled it out, and not knowing who was going to be preaching or anything, and focusing on it during the confession portion, so that regardless of what was preached on, I could still lead that portion and we would have some consistency through Lent. So far, I've just sent a note out when I find out, and I just basically say, if you can work with this theme, great. If not, I'll try and work in some of the service to tie it together or something. And messy people, merciful God is a pretty theme that you can pull. They use Judges, but I didn't use Judges. There's more examples in scripture other than just Judges for that. And it's actually worked out well. Everybody so far has preached around the theme. And it's actually kind of cool how they've all taken a different approach. Whereas if you had stuck to Judges, I almost think it would have got maybe a bit boring, but so it's been kind of cool. And the pastor that's coming to visit us on the weekend of March 26th, I just sent him our newsletters since Lent. So he was able to read my intro to the congregation, what we were doing. And I didn't say anything. I thought, well, we'll see if he picks up on that, because I didn't want to pressure him to preach on it, on our theme. And he just emailed me the other day, and he's got an idea to preach on the theme, which is different than all the other ones we've had. So I just kind of went for it and thought, you know what, if it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And yeah, it's been working out good.
Asking somebody to preach on Judges, that's not going to be a sermon that they have likely in their back pocket ready to roll, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I pulled away from that part of it, but there's a lot you can preach on just that general theme. Yeah.
I've also noticed that I used to think that that was wrong. You couldn't ask them to preach on something specific, but I've leaned into that a little bit, and I've had great luck. Not necessarily for a full theme, I don't want to be rigid, but just sort of, this is what we're working on, because that was one of our big things when we went vacant again, was how do we keep services feeling like they can go into the next. We hired a new graduate for Advent, and that was great because he was sitting in all our planning meetings. But I think we had a service and we had I could not find a pastor, and we really were trying to focus on missions. We had Edudeo coming to visit. We had our mission teams all set up to give their kids from the high school and our church, and it was, the whole service is going to be wrapped around this, and yet I don't have a pastor. We ended up finding someone to preach. Actually, I think he might be related to you, Lucinda. Nick Cupri And again, he was great. I just sort of said, like, I know this might seem outside of what you're supposed to do, but if you can sort of focus it on missions. And right away he wanted to know all the information. He wanted the link to Ejideo. And it was great. Like, so I find the more I do it, the more responsive they are. They're all typically, again, and more like a classis appointment or someone who's got a lot of sermons, they probably can find something that they've already preached on. Or they like the challenge of thinking of something new.
Yeah, I've done things like that too. Around Pentecost, I asked the guest pastors just something. I kept it fairly wide open, something spirit led, something about the Holy Spirit working in our lives. And we did about 4 weeks of that around Pentecost. That worked really well. I will ask specific themes as well if a guest pastor can do that. Like I said, I'm not in that position as much right now because we have a person who will preach every Sunday part-time, and that's been very helpful. But last summer as well, what I did was, and this may help you as well, Corinne, I decided that because it was summertime, I didn't want guest pastors I didn't want to block them in too much. I just appreciated the fact that some of them would show up and come. And so what I did was I felt because of the summer, I just created the whole first part of the service surrounding songs of praise. So our whole opening of the service every single Sunday for those weeks were psalms of praise and just ways of expressing praise. And I used that, and then I let the pastor know that too, but they could therefore, whatever they preached on, they could mesh that into there. And that made my job a whole lot easier. I could take time off as well in the summer because it's something you could pre-plan for the most part. And then it's just last minute adjustments that you make. But that worked really, really well too. And I, may even do that this year again in the summer just because it keeps things a little more laid back, and we're taxing our volunteers a lot. I think more of you are probably doing the same thing. We were in a tough church with COVID because we were in a really bad area. Emerging from that has been really hard, and our dedicated volunteers, we're getting more and more, and I'm getting more yeses when I ask for participation, which is just beautiful. But I don't want to tax or overload anyone too much. So again, pre-planning an easier summer that I can kind of keep running smoothly really it made a difference last summer, and it will make a difference, I'm sure, this summer as well.
What are some of those other themes that you all have worked with? Like, what are some of those things that have been really good anchors for you? Like I like the messy people idea and having a preset, like structured service of confession and a psalm of praise at the beginning. What are some of those other things that you have tried or used, or maybe this is a good space to brainstorm some of those?
So for the last couple of years, actually, and it's interesting that it's stretched out as long as it has, we actually focus on either an attribute of God or a name of God at the beginning of the service. And it's amazing how fluid you can make a service when your focus is on something so dominant at the beginning, right? I mean, we're recognizing who God is. Your songs to come out of that, and even the prayer of confession, and even the prayers of the people, they can really highlight that again once you've finished with your call to worship in those songs, right? So that's been really good. And even our guest pastors, when our pastor has this week off or something, they've mentioned how they really appreciate that and how it anchors so well the rest of the service. Now, normally we pick it according to what our pastor's preaching on, but I'm thinking we can continue with that and flip it around. Here's our focus. This is maybe, could you highlight that in a service or something in your sermon? I mean, so.
We have a lot of volunteers that participate in the service. So like I said earlier, we have had videos, which some people may, you know, that might not be their first preference. But because it's just for the sermon, we still have so much involvement and livelihood before and after that it's been a really positive feedback from them. In fact, we're doing a Lent series right now, and it's video, which for planners is super helpful because you can plan all in advance, because I know exactly what the pastor's going to say. And we use CRC pastors, and we ask them beforehand, and all of them have been like honored that we're using their stuff. But again, just making sure there's still enough elements in the service have really been helpful. I mean, like even all ages and getting the kids up there makes it still feel like it's a church family, even when we have, you know, weeks and weeks of a different pastor in a row.
I'm curious how many of you have tried video sermons?
Yeah, I was going to add to that too. We did a video series, I think during the first advent of COVID. So I think 2020, I think we were able to go back to church for a bit there, or maybe it was 2021. I can't remember, but Pastor Craig Hookema from Ottawa, my daughter goes to that church, and I've been there, worship there sometimes when I'm visiting. And I really enjoy his preaching. So I checked out his Advent series from the year before, and it was a theme forevermore. And he was so helpful. Like, he sent me all his the written manuscripts, because we have some people with hearing loss and stuff. So we'd like to provide that. He sent his notes that he would put in the bulletin the week before for reflection. And then he even went so far as someone in their congregation had made this really big piece of artwork that had all symbolism in it for every week. He mailed that whole piece of artwork to Thunder Bay, and we were able to display that at church and that. So yeah, and we got a lot of positive feedback about the video series and that. So yeah, if you can find something that works well with your congregation, and you know, the pastor's willing to work with you, it can turn out really, really well. And like someone else said too, it allows you to do a lot of pre-planning once you have, you know you're going to do that for a couple of weeks.
We've actually gone totally to video ones now, unless we can get a guest pastor, which doesn't happen too much up north. So we have Pastor Bert Slofstra, who's a retired pastor from the Lower Mainland, and he actually pre-records sermons for us. So he addresses us. Good morning, Smithers Christian Reformed Church. He'll do a greeting. He'll do a closing. He's led us in communion on video. And we've gotten, like, at first it's kind of odd, but you get so used to it, especially when you have the privilege of the same person. We're so used to him now, seeing him that way, that it's really fun. He's come to visit. He has a family connection here, so he has been up here before, but it's been a real gift for us, because otherwise we would be scrambling all the time. And this way he gets to do series of sermons, and then he pre-records them, and we put them online every week. It works well for our online service as well, so that part's really good.
I wonder if that's like an opportunity for some of these pastors. Like, I like that they pre-record, like they can't get to your church, but they pre-record it and it's still for your church.
For a while, when Prince George CRC was also vacant, they actually got his permission to use some of the same ones that we had.
That'd be really interesting to put a roster together of CRC ministers who would be willing to do that, right? And to do an entire series or a good chunk of time at a time in a congregation without actually being there.
Yeah, because I know they have like the COVID list on the network, but again, those are almost outdated now. Like I've gone there many times, and they're very like relevant to like pandemic, or so it's hard to find one that you can pop in now. But yeah, that would be interesting to see if there's pastors willing to do that, even retired pastors.
And one of the strengths of that way too is that I feel like some of the others of you have said, you still can be in authentic worship with your own church because all the support people are still your local people. We have elders praying and different worship teams every week and kids joining in and kids song and like all the other parts are local people. So it doesn't, once you get over the fact that it's on a screen and not the live face preaching, it's actually really beneficial to the church to see all the different parts working together.
One thing our church has done kind of naturally, just because my husband is on the search committee as well, is kind of ask the search committee, like, star a sermon that you've listened to if you think this would be good for us, because, you know, like, they're listening to and watching so many sermons. So, you know, for the first, unfortunately, it took a while for us to figure out how helpful that would be. So they probably watched a year's worth without us ever really benefiting from it. And we don't need video ones as often, but that has been great to just have in the back of our minds when they know that, you know, this isn't a pastor that we're going to call in the near future or whatever. I mean, they're listening to so many. We have a full team of, you know, 10 of them. If they all liked them and thought that they would be applicable for our church, then I'm sure they are. So using that for a service is a great tool too.
I was just thinking the communion piece. We've had a retired pastor that's stepped in to lead our communion, but he's like now officially retiring, like done doing that as well. So that's my next thing I've been thinking a lot about too, like how can we bring communion when we have such a hard time finding a pastor. We do have pastors that come that are Baptist pastors locally and stuff, but I'm not sure, like, you know, figuring out when we can have communion. Like, we can't even follow our communion schedule anymore because it's almost like, well, we'll do it when we have somebody that can have it, do it, right? But my idea that's in my brain that I've been mulling around is that it would be so cool to be able to have a pastor that you could connect with online at the same time their church is doing communion, something like that. Because I just think it would be such a powerful thing to be, it's okay that it's recorded if that's the way it has to be, but to be having communion at the same time as another church that's like miles and miles away, it's kind of a, you know, the communion of the saints type thing, right? So that's kind of something that's been in my mulling around in my mind. So
you have to ask your sound technician to try to connect you via the live stream to another.
Yeah. Like, I was thinking our, you know, pastor that left in January, you know, just trying to see if we could coordinate something, but that might be a little bit hard because you'd have to time it. But yeah. Anyway, that was just something I was thinking. But
there are churches, 2 of them in Eastern Canada right now, that are doing that exact same thing. And they are timing their services such, and they're joining each other on live stream. And I believe that one of them was, they were both vacant when they started, and they would take turns leading, right? And so if one of them had pulpit supply, it was great because they would be the live stream feature for the day. But they alternate and they go back and forth. And so they're worshiping together virtually. So they can do communion together, they can do sacraments, like they can do all of those things together, even though they're 2 separate congregations. But they've been doing this now for a while, and then it's a matter of finding one pulpit supply instead of 2. So I don't know if that would ever be something any of you would ever consider, but partnering up with another church that worships at the same time as yours and saying, we're gonna do this thing for a while, just recognizing that this is a particular season in our church ministry that might call for something like this.
So I'm not very techy. And my question would be, I think that's a great idea, by the way. And I don't know if the Chandler CRC would be open to that or not. I think they would, actually. What about internet service? How reliable must that be? Because I can tell you, like, where they're located is not very good. And so is that, and again, I'm not techie, so that's why I'm asking the question, like, how strong does your internet have to be to make sure you can live stream accordingly without disrupting things? And really, like, if it's going in and out, or if it's hazy, fuzzy, whatever, blurring, whatever, and therefore actually taking away from that experience in worship as well. I'm just wondering what you guys think.
I would think it would have to be pretty reliable.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
That harkens back to early pandemic days when all of us were trying to figure out how to like live stream onto YouTube, and YouTube crashed on Palm Sunday in 2020 because so many churches all of a sudden were memories, not great ones, people.
The other thing that we, along the similar lines of the video pastor, is we had an interim pastor for a few months, but he couldn't be with us full time. So he would preach, he would come for 2 weekends and then leave us with 2 recorded sermons. So he would continue his own series until he could come back again.
We've also made use of people within our congregation. We have someone who's quite involved in creation care and the climate witness program. So he will preach occasionally and not frequently, but he has a couple of times a year he will preach, and really the focus is creation care. We've had other people who are, not a lot, but a couple of other people. One of our Sundays this summer, I really wanted to have, rather than try and find one more pastor, I thought, let's do an in-house service. And when I hear some of what you all are doing, it sounds a lot like what we did that Sunday, except the only thing I did not do was I didn't look for a pastor. So, and we just made it all praise, because despite everything, we just felt like that was a time in our lives where we had been felt like we've been pulled down so much that we really needed to spend some time just offering praise to God. And I asked somebody in the church if they would just do a personal reflection on praise, and that became the message. But our songs were around praise, or the readings were around praise. Everything circulated around that. And then we just had a member, and I'd hoped for 2, and that didn't work out. But 1 or 2 members who just did a short reflection on whatever that theme was, in our case, praise. And that worked really, really well too. And then it became really an in-house service, but it was really, I felt very united.
So Alan, you
Yeah.
just hit an exact point that Chandler CRC is dealing with. So, or trying to look into and find out. So I'm not a gatekeeper, so let me make that note right now, okay? So I'm not recording for the premise of reporting someone to the law authorities above us, right? So their thing is, it can be difficult to find pastors. And it can be difficult to find pastors that they enjoy having lead service. Okay, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So you just said you have had individuals within your congregation who obviously are not ordained then. So I've done a ton of reading. This is why I say I'm not the gatekeeper. So I'm just asking the question. What is the process that permitted you to go ahead and just have either yourself or anybody else in the congregation to lead worship, however it was led? Because everywhere I read in the CRC stuff it is very stringent, and there's people, even when I'm reading stuff, going, well, we need to talk to that church because they're out of line.
We don't struggle with that perhaps as much as other churches do. I'll probably just say it that way. We do run we had a pastor before, when we still had our pastor, who was very open to sharing that pulpit space with others. He felt very much that many people are gifted, and God has given gifts to so many people. So he was very open at sharing that pulpit space. I will say it was not done indiscriminately. All of this was very thoughtfully done, because we recognize it's the message you share is really essential too, that it has to be good. But we had already built in a climate of somewhat of openness, and anybody we get now, who is not ordained, gets run by, we run it through council. We always get that permission, and they are, in that sense, the gatekeepers. And council, if they can affirm it's a member, in good standing of a church, and, is of a strong faith life, then we're okay with that.
Okay, so yeah, so what you're saying, and that was interesting you say that about the gatekeeper piece being the council, because I did read a lot of that, but of course the conversations I read online really went back and forth with, well, yeah, there's a gatekeeper, but there's always that but. So what I'm hearing, right, wrong, or otherwise, I'm not sure, is that the CRC local consistory really is the one that has the permission to make that determination, like you said, based on good standing, faithful, all the things that you're looking for in someone to lead something like that. And that is permitted at the council or consistory level. Am I correct?
That's what we are doing. And
Okay.
I don't know if we are following the church order right down to the end, but I think our church has really felt this is the right way to work it. And we don't use it indiscriminately. But when the need comes.
We did something similar, Ellen. Where we had someone from our church write something. We didn't call it a sermon. It was a reflection, I believe we called it. And he actually vetted it, if you would say that, with our STM who had already left, but has always kept in contact with us. So an ordained pastor looked at it, and then again, council approved it. And we do have pastors that come. Now, I don't know if they have their practice to preach or if they've just been approved. I don't know the whole legality or logistics of all that, but that are not ordained pastors, that never went to school for for it. And that seems to
Yeah,
work.
Allison, I read a lot. I'm
Go
sorry.
ahead.
Well, I was gonna say, Allison, I that is one aspect I did read, but even under like what you're talking about, like it had to be certain individuals. But no, I like to hear that. And I got permission on behalf of the Chandler CRC president to kind of speak a little bit. So, because he's learning feedback as well on how you guys, exactly what you're talking about, handle that. So there's two different approaches here. One is, hey, we're the consistory. It's our congregation. We're the gatekeeper to this. And on the other hand, it is based, you are following a church of book order in the sense of, hey, we have someone that's not ordained, they're being vetted and so forth. Now, my question there, Allison, to what extent is the message written? Because so when I preach, I have no notes whatsoever. If you went to my laptop, you wouldn't even find one. I have no notebook. I have nothing. Like it's all it's in my head. I work on it the full week coming in, and I just let the spirit go. And then I teach on whatever, I have formulation in my brain, but it's just not on paper. It's nowhere in evidence. And so my question is, if this congregation said, well, we're gonna kind of follow the Church of Book order and have it vetted, to what extent are you doing that? Like, is it the entire sermon, or is it just like a postcard note of,
in our case, it was someone very new to it, and so I think in his own comfort had written most of it out. Again, it didn't sound like that when he read it from the pulpit, so I'm not exactly sure what he all wrote out, but he at least had a couple meetings with this other pastor, ordained pastor. But again, that was just a one-off. If he had to do that every week, that would get old, I'm assuming.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Hey, Pat, if you want to stay on after this call, I pulled out church order. I've got some tips for you at some point in time. But there's some interesting nuggets of truth in there.
Thank you.
So we can stay on, we can chat church order after this, because that's always a great conversation to have.
I'm staying on.
Yeah.
We just had classes, and there were 3 or 4 individuals who were given license to exhort in our classes now. So that is a route too, right? I think we probably have about 5 or 6 within our classes that now have a license to exhort, and that really frees up a lot of pastors. Instead of having pulpit supply, they have to be there, then these individuals are generally free. I mean, when our pastor is on a his, fifth Sunday kind of thing, we often have one of those individuals come and preach for us. But they are examined before classes, so.
But they are not ordained, so they can't do like the element, like the.
No, they cannot do the elements. That's right.
Back to the like communion, I would love to hear. So we are video people, and like I understand that an ordained pastor has to, do the Lord's Supper. So we have a video. We literally have a video file that we use of our old pastor who's given us permission to do this. And we've only had to do it twice, but I'm already feeling like, oh, it takes the whole, unity, togetherness. And I know we're used to it from COVID being online, but it takes a lot out of that aspect of the service that I really enjoyed. I'm just wondering if anybody, apart from them doing the sacraments, if anyone has ideas for when you don't have a pastor, but you're still doing it, that it feels more togetherness instead of, all of us with our cups waiting for the video to turn on. Do it.
So our pastor was ill maybe 2 Januaries ago. Anyhow, he was ill for quite a while. And that question actually came up in our congregation as well. There is an allowance that classes can give permission to elders to actually lead.
Oh, okay.
So that's something to look in. You'd have to ask your classes, right? The intern committee or whatever, but they can actually give permission to certain elders to lead that portion of your service every week or every time you have it.
Church Order Article 55. Write that
Thank you.
down. So you've got that in hand when you go.
Article 55.
Synod 2002 decided that in the case of need, an ordained person who has received the approval of classis may administer the Lord's Supper. The supplement to this article indicates that this should be an elder.
Okay.
Yeah, we've gone to our classes and gotten have that approval.
Okay.
So we did it more to go to elderly homes to bring communion to them. And now that we're facing it more, it's more difficult in our congregation during worship. We have that permission to do that as well. But our issue now is none of our elders feel comfortable doing it. So it's like, come on, people. But I would say, make sure you have an elder that's lined up, that's okay to do it.
Kyle and Corrine, take notes. Make sure that in advance of August and September, you have an elder that has been approved to administer sacraments.
I was going to say, because elders switch over too, so they're
you.
constantly having to go for reapproval of people.
Yeah.
As far as making it more personal, if you end up with the video portion being done by a recorded pastor, we've done it because we're a big church. It's you got to work out the logistics, but having a variety, like 4 elders serve at 4 stations, and people come by the stations and pick up and then the elders bless them as they receive the elements, and then we go down, and then everyone. Then you actually take the elements right there. So it's just all the preparation that's done by the minister ahead of time. Yeah.
Yeah, we're still not at the getting up stage of Lord's Supper. We're still at those wonderful wafer cup things that taste like styrofoam.
It's the consistency as they like melt in your mouth that I can't get over. I'm like, oh,
I know. And they're gone.
Can I ask a totally different question on a different topic?
Yes.
So this might also be because we lost quite a bit of staff all at once. Just to preface this question by saying, I think our church is definitely just needing spiritual formation and spiritual guidance. And I think the people that are in our roles, me included, I have my specific days where my son is at daycare that I can get this work done. We don't have pastor, we don't have a youth pastor. Our ministry board, tries to come to staff meetings, but they have full-time jobs. And so it seems like we're sometimes running into kind of more the running of the church, the business side, more so than than spiritual formation and being able to move forward in that way. And so just in your roles, like with, you know, with not having a pastor, like we said at the beginning, that other section in our job descriptions just grew. And for us, I think we're seeing that as a bit of a negative in really having time to devote to spiritual formation. One, I guess, two-part question. One, anyone else experiencing that? And two, how are you guys, still feeding everyone spiritually? And especially I think of, you know, the worship team, the worship ministry, we have some really small things going, you know, we're trying to have some prayer partners and devotionals that get sent out. But because there's so much time focused on kind of the business side, not business, but I think you guys know what I mean. Any thoughts on that?
That was one of our big things when we lost a pastor, was how do we keep it going in that, instead of, like you said, the logistics or the coordinating side of things. I don't know that we have an answer, but one thing that I've been doing now, we didn't have any staff besides our part-time administrator before this. And I started working 10 hours a week when we lost the pastor, the STM. So it's a fairly new role for me, although I was doing it pretty much by volunteer. So I wanted to see what else I could add. And one of the things that I've done is use social media or email. And there's a Friday email that goes out and a Monday email that goes out. Is just to focus on our worship services. One is sort of prepping them for what's to come. Maybe like prepare your hearts. Like doesn't give the whole like sermon theme away or anything, but just a Bible verse or a song or something. And then on Monday, we call it Monday meditation, and it's sort of questions that people should be asking themselves throughout the week, so that they have that Sunday service in their mind all week. And it's not just these broken or individual services that we keep having. So even though there may not be a series, it still feels consistent in that way. I don't know if that's helpful.
I'm also going to name how easy it is to get pulled into a lot of responsibility that necessarily is not yours to pick up and to carry, right? The spiritual care of all of the congregation, if that was not on your original job description, should not fall under your job description unnecessarily just because of a vacancy, right? And looking at the people who are about to walk into one, I wonder what proactive steps there are to take ahead of time, knowing that that is going to be an additional need and an additional burden. The thought even crossed my mind. I'm like, what happens if you know you're heading into a vacancy and you add an extra elder or two for the year? So that you have elders that are going to be more equipped to deal with this spiritual care and to do some of that extra pastoral work for the year. But yeah, just recognizing that, like, if your job is to plan and lead worship services every week and it's not to do spiritual and pastoral care for your whole congregation, that is a heavy burden to pick up and to carry, and might not be one that you are called to do so.
I know in Chandler, they're kind of blessed with some local pastors that are retired or semi-retired, and they have drawn from them to do the pastoral care literally for that congregation during the vacancy and stuff like that, and to guide them in their spiritual stuff too.
We are nearing top of the hour. I wonder if there's any other questions out there or ideas to share that have kind of sparked in your head in this last hour.
Yeah, I have a question. It's something I've been thinking of with my role. I work, well, now it's up to 27 hours a week, but I've been thinking I have the opportunity usually to go to worship symposium with my professional development budget. I didn't get to go this year, just with some other stuff going on. So, you know, I'm left with a bit of a budget now, and I've kind of just been looking for an opportunity for for myself, like something like this hour, you know, where there would be some you know, some learning there, but also just almost like a retreat for, you know, people who have been in positions like ours that are doing, like, you know, like right now I'm planning our pastor's visit coming up, which really isn't in my job, but you know, it's like, well, Angela can do it, you know. So that's what I'm kind of, yeah, been looking for, just starting to see if there's, you know, just something to get away that's a spiritual retreat almost, with some learning opportunities. Yeah.
Maybe there's wisdom to building that into budgets in advance of vacancy, saying, I recognize in advance that I'm going to need enough sustenance in my own spiritual development and my own spiritual life to be able to continue to do this work well. And maybe that looks like an extra Sunday off every couple of weeks. Maybe that looks like I need a weekend to just like go camp in the woods and unplug from my cell phone, and have that time. I don't know. That's, yeah.
Conference wise, it's one of the spendier conferences around. So, you know, depending on budget, but I had the opportunity 2 years ago to go to the Getty Sing conference in Nashville, and it was awesome. I mean, I expected it to be quite good, and it was even better than I thought it would be. Just so refreshing, you know, especially coming out of the pandemic too, just singing with a big old group of people. And so that was a good one. But like I said, I pretty much had to like maneuver like 2 years worth of conference budget to bring a few people with me. It was a stretch, but yeah.
Along the lines of whether you can get a break or not, sometimes there's worship leaders in other communities who will share some of their skills. Because we're getting these recorded sermons from pastor in the Lower Mainland, he recommended, when we were feeling really stressed with new people who were leading worship who didn't really, it was so daunting to plan the whole service. So he said, well, check with Sandra, she might be willing. So now we've contracted with her. And when he provides us with sermons, then we contract with her to provide the service outlines. She plans prayers and readings and confessions and all that kind of thing. It's a great thing for us. That's just helped us to hang in there.
That makes me wonder then, Irene, what would it look like if, you know, the pastor that preached for you for so many weeks, if that preacher was willing to move to a different congregation and do something similar, and then you have a nice package that's already in place of worship service elements that have worked and a sermon. And
would that be great? Yeah.
Yeah. It's like a rent-a-pastor.
Yeah.
I might take that out of the recording because that's probably not the kind of thing that you should say, but yeah. Anything else today? I do want to respect your time. I was thinking after this, it would be really nice to start an email thread with those who would like to be on an email chain. And I'll limit it just to the people that have been on this call today and won't expand it any further without any permission. But that way, if something comes up and you have a random thought or a question, or even better yet, something that's worked really well for you in your context, to have just an email exchange going that makes that work and makes that happen. No pressure. If you would like to be on that follow-up email, just throw your email address for me in the chat, and I will add you to that. Couple other heads up things. We're about to drop the second 6 faith formation practices, like the faith practices series, summer series, 6 more services, intergenerational, with take-home activities. And the goal of that are to be non-preaching services. So if you're looking into summer or even looking into fall, those are good options that are kind of like plug and play with lots of different, like highly intergenerational ideas. And they're all meant to be sermon free. And so we'll throw those out your way. Those are coming probably right around Easter time.
I want to thank you too for the work you do. I follow the Worship Ministries Facebook page too, and I don't comment often, but I do appreciate the questions. I appreciate the information, and the variety of things that come out. So thank you, and for your really big role there, because sometimes that's what we need too. We need to have someone else say some of these things, or we need to feel connected to others, and then you feel like you can go forward yourself again.
And, you know, for all of you that were on this call, there was at least one other that said, hey, I can't be there, but I'm in the same boat. There are a lot of you right now that are serving in vacant congregations, and some that have been doing it years again, and some more recent. So however we can find space for you to be able to collaborate and to be able to like just share space, I think is a win. But before I let you go, let me say a prayer for you all today. Lord, I thank you for each of the worship leaders and each of the congregations that are represented on this call today. I thank you that you, no matter who is in the pulpit, remains the Lord of every single one of these churches. I pray for each of these leaders today, and the particular burden that they carry, recognizing the weight of responsibility, the weight of the unpredictability from week to week, the weight of feeling responsible for spiritual care and for additional planning and wondering whether internet is going to hold out, and all of these extra things that add a layer of complication to a job that already is difficult, is wonderful, and it's a calling that we live into and we love, but also is difficult. So today I pray for an extra measure of strength for each of them, whether that looks like creativity and finishing up those last couple of things for Sunday this week, or thinking out a couple months in advance to what ministry is going to look like in a couple of months. I just pray for a measure of strength and wisdom on each of these leaders today. Thank you for the ways that we've been able to talk today and to engage with each other, and also to know that you have been with us in the midst of all of these conversations. And so go with us this day, back to our own contexts and our own congregations. And we pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Thanks, friends. It was nice to chat with you all. Nice to connect. And I will send a follow-up email. And Pat, if you want to stay on and talk church order, I'm totally game.
I'm all in.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
I grew up CRC, by the way, everyone.
Thank you.
Now I'm ordained. No, I'm kidding.
Yep. So it sounds like you're in an interesting position, Pat.
Well, yeah. So a little back history too is, I did grow up CRC, so I understand